Picture this. You're standing on a platform in New York City. It's the early 1980s.
But, so the station is totally grimy. It smells like ozone and damp concrete.
Exactly. And a train is just screaming past, completely drowning out your own thoughts. I mean, it is the absolute opposite of a hushed, sterile museum with white walls and climate control.
Oh, totally. No velvet ropes anywhere.
Yeah, but right there on the wall next to you, amidst all that noise and grit, someone has drawn this glowing, pulsing, radiant baby in crisp white chalk.
And it's just a total disruption of your routine. You're forced to engage with it right there on your morning commute.
Welcome to today's Deep Dive. Today, we are decoding the source material on Keith Haring. And our mission here is to look way past the T-shirts, the coffee mugs, and, the ubiquitous pop art brand.
Yeah, we're tracking the reality of a brilliant, fiercely democratic artist, a guy who essentially hijacked New York City to force everyone to look at the things society desperately wanted to ignore.
And that's such a necessary reframing, I think, because when an artist's work becomes so deeply embedded in global pop culture, it's just remarkably easy to only see the merchandise and completely miss the visionary behind it.
I mean, absolutely. You really have to rewind to a specific time and place to understand him. We're talking about the cultural melting pot of late 70s and 80s downtown New York.
Which was financially a bankrupt city.
Oh, totally bankrupt.
Yeah.
But creatively, it was exploding. Yet punk rock, hip-hop, and the fine art world all just colliding in these dirty downtown clubs.
And right into the middle of that collision walks this kid raised in Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, small-town kid.
Right. And when you look at his early life in the sources, the influences are just this wild, fascinating mix. He grew up drawing with his dad, heavily influenced by the accessible, fluid line work of Walt Disney.
And Dr. Seuss and Looney Tunes.
Exactly.
Which perfectly explains the highly animated, almost bouncy quality of his later art. Like, if you look at his figures, they always look like they're in mid-motion.
They really do. But then, in his teenage years, he gets swept up in the Jesus movement.
Oh, right. The 70s youth movement.
Yeah, it was this grassroots anti-materialist thing. And while he didn't stick with the religious dogma long-term, you can clearly see how it planted a very specific philosophical seed.
How so?
Well, the Jesus movement was all about bypassing the traditional stuffy church establishment. The goal was to have a direct, unmediated connection with the divine.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That makes so much sense. That desire to communicate massive, complex ideas directly to the people without asking permission from some institutional middleman.
Exactly.
That basically became the defining ethos of his entire career. He was already hardwired to bypass the gatekeepers long before he ever picked up a piece of chalk.
So, cut to 1978, he moves to New York to study at the School of Visual Arts. He's working as a busboy at a nightclub called Danceteria, just soaking in this vibrant, chaotic city.
Danceteria is legendary, yeah.
Right. But he's not just painting on canvases in a studio. He starts obsessively studying semiotics.
Which is huge for him.
It really is. And we hear that word thrown around a lot in art theory. But according to our sources, it's actually the literal key to unlocking Haring's work.
It really is. I mean, semiotics, at its most basic level, is the study of signs and symbols and how they create meaning.
Like a stop sign.
Exactly. Think of a red octagonal stop sign. It tells you exactly what to do without needing to use a single word. It is a universally understood symbol.
Right.
And Haring realized that if he could distill complex emotions or social situations into simple, bold symbols, he could communicate with everyone simultaneously. He basically wanted to create a universal stop sign for joy, or for danger, or for energy.
So when he draws a barking dog or a flying saucer or, a baby with action lines radiating off it, he's creating a visual vocabulary.
A vocabulary that an investment banker, a tourist, and an unhoused person can all read instantly.
Right, without needing a master's degree in art history.
Precisely. And alongside semiotics, he's heavily influenced by the counterculture author William Burroughs, specifically Burroughs' cut-up technique.
Oh, the cut-up technique is wild.
It is. Burroughs would take existing pages of text, literally cut them up with scissors, and rearrange the words to create entirely new, often jarring sentences.
Yeah.
It was a way of breaking down conventional narratives.
And Haring didn't just study that in a classroom. He took it to the streets.
Yeah, he did.
In 1980, he was cutting up words from the New York Post and taping these bizarre juxtaposed headlines to lampposts all around Manhattan. He'd create fake headlines like, Reagan Slain by Hero Cop.
Which is such a brilliant punk rock manipulation of public space.
Totally.
He was experimenting with how the public reacts to authoritative information when it's suddenly warped and presented in an unexpected context. You're walking down the street on autopilot, you see what looks like a newspaper headline, and it just jolts you awake.
It totally disrupts your reality,
Yeah.
which leads us perfectly to his massive breakthrough. So he's riding the subway, and he notices these empty advertisement panels.
The black ones.
Yeah. When a company's lease for an ad expired, the transit authority would just cover the old ad with a sheet of matte black paper. And Haring sees this not as a void, but as an invitation.
Right, the laboratory.
Exactly. He called the subway his laboratory. He goes out, buys a box of ordinary white chalk, and starts creating these rapid-fire spontaneous drawings right on the black paper.
And the contrast was striking. The matte black paper and the powdery white chalk. Plus, the sheer athleticism of it is astounding.
Because he was moving so fast.
Right, because it was technically vandalism, so he had to be lightning fast to avoid the transit police. He was sometimes completing as many as 40 of these chalk paintings in a single day, just riding the trains from station to station.
It's incredible. I mean, he was basically uploading a visual virus into the city's mainframe. By targeting the advertisement space, he was hacking the one place on the subway platform where commuter attention was already programmed to look.
That visual virus analogy is spot on.
It wasn't just random graffiti, it was a highly calculated hijacking of the transit system's infrastructure. He was guaranteeing that thousands of people couldn't ignore his work.
And the choice of the subway is the ultimate realization of that Jesus movement philosophy we talked about earlier, bypassing the gatekeepers.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if you put a painting in a Chelsea gallery, only a very specific affluent demographic is going to walk through those doors. But the subway is the great equalizer. It is the circulatory system of the city.
Right, everyone rides the train.
Exactly. By drawing figures with no discernible age, race, or gender, just pure energetic outlines, he deployed a totally democratic visual language in the most democratic space imaginable.
But of course, the art world has a way of co-opting rebellion. The subway drawings go viral. People are literally riding the trains just to look for the nearest chalk drawings.
Yeah, it became a whole thing.
And suddenly, the traditional, highly exclusive fine art establishment catches on. By 1982, he's having massive breakthrough exhibitions at commercial galleries, like the Tony Shafrazi Gallery.
His rise was stratospheric. Suddenly, this kid drawing in the dirt of the subway is rubbing shoulders with Andy Warhol.
Who actually becomes a close friend and mentor, right?
Yeah, a huge mentor.
Yeah.
And he's hanging out with Jean-Michel Basquiat.
And he's blurring the lines between art, music, and fashion. I mean, he's designing clothes for Madonna. She wore a skirt he designed with Vivienne Westwood in her Borderline video.
That's right.
He's painting directly onto the bodies of icons like Grace Jones and the choreographer Bill T. Jones. But I want to pause on his collaborations for a second because our sources highlight one partnership that is absolutely vital to understanding his visual rhythm.
You're talking about Angel Ortiz.
Yes, better known as L.A. Through.
L.A. Thorne is so crucial here. He was a Puerto Rican teenager from the Lower East Side and a brilliant graffiti artist in his own right. Haring actually saw L.A. Thorne's tag on a wall and actively sought him out.
And when you look at pieces they created together, it's just this mesmerizing collision of styles. You have Haring's iconic, thick, bold figures anchoring the canvas, but the negative space around them is completely filled with L.A. the Sex's intricate, flowing, interlocking graffiti tags.
It fundamentally altered the kinetic energy of the canvas. L.A. Second brought this authentic, street-level calligraphy that complemented Haring's pop art sensibilities perfectly.
It really seems like a true symbiotic creative partnership.
It was. And it's a deeply unfortunate reality of the art world that for a long time after Haring's death, L.A. II was largely marginalized. He was denied the credit and financial compensation he deserved.
Though the sources do note there have been significant recent efforts by the Haring Foundation and historians to rectify that erasure.
Yes, thankfully. It really highlights how much Haring absorbed the literal rhythms of New York streets.
But here's where the story hits a major point of friction in the deep dive. He's having this high-end gallery success. Paintings are starting to sell for tens of thousands of dollars. And then in 1986, he opens the Pop Shop in Soho.
A retail store.
Literally a retail store. He is selling his designs on T-shirts, posters, buttons, and inflatable toys.
And the traditional art establishment reacted with absolute horror. The critics were appalled.
And I have to admit, I get it. I want to push back on this a little bit. If a celebrated, rebellious street artist today suddenly opened a boutique in a wealthy neighborhood to sell branded keychains and coffee mugs, we would collectively roll our
Oh, we
eyes.
call it a massive cash grab.
Exactly. We'd call it an egregious cash grab. How does the art world justify the pop shop as, democratization rather than just blatant selling out?
It's a completely valid critique, but you have to look at the mechanical reason why he opened the store. By the mid-'80s, the art market realized how incredibly valuable his subway drawings were.
Right.
So people started going down into the stations with crowbars and literally peeling the black paper panels off the walls. They were stealing the chalk drawings to sell them at auction.
Wow. Capitalism literally tore the walls down to commodify his free gifts to the public.
Exactly. The laboratory was compromised. He physically couldn't give his art away for free anymore without a dealer sealing it. So he had to stop drawing in the subway?
That's so frustrating.
It is. But his stated goal from day one was getting the work out to the public at large. If the subway was closed to him, how does a kid in Queens or the Bronx get to own a piece of his art?
I see. So they buy a $1 button or a $10 t-shirt.
Exactly. He wasn't commercializing to be greedy. He was weaponizing commerce to maintain his connection to the working class.
He actually talked about feeling a profound sense of guilt over his sudden wealth, too. He knew he was making more money than he could ever need, and he viewed the pop shop as a way of breaking down the walls between high art for the rich and low art for the masses.
And that financial independence gave him something incredibly powerful, an uncancelable global megaphone.
Right, because he didn't have to worry about alienating a wealthy gallery owner anymore.
Exactly. So as we move into the latter half of the 1980s, we see his work pivot sharply. He uses his platform to tackle the heaviest, most controversial geopolitical and social issues of the decade.
And his strategy here is fascinating. Let's look at the mechanics of his activism based on the sources. In 1986, the crack cocaine epidemic is absolutely devastating neighborhoods across New York City.
Just tearing them apart.
Yeah, and Haring doesn't paint a canvas and hang it in a gallery to protest. He drives up to an abandoned handball court in East Harlem, right alongside the FDR Drive, and paints a massive blazing orange mural that simply says, "Crack is whack."
The location choice is brilliant. The FDR Drive is one of the busiest highways in Manhattan.
Oh, yeah?
He's ensuring that tens of thousands of commuters trapped in bumper-to-bumper traffic have absolutely no choice but to stare at this giant, unavoidable warning sign.
And he didn't have a permit for it, of course. He gets arrested by the NYPD for vandalism. But the media instantly jumps to his defense.
Because they understand the utility of what he's doing.
Right. He's eventually released with a tiny fine, and the Parks Department actually invites him back to paint a permanent, updated version of the mural on that exact same wall.
He was using his fame as a shield to do highly visible, illegal public health interventions.
Yeah.
And he took this strategy global, too.
Right, like with South Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
He created a widely reproduced series of posters titled Free South Africa to explicitly target and protest the system of apartheid. And he designed a stark black and white striped flag to symbolize the looming existential dread of a nuclear apocalypse during the Cold War.
But the most urgent and tragically personal era of his activism centered around the LGBTQ rights movement and the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, this is where things get really heavy.
In the 1980s, the government response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic was characterized by silence and inaction. And as an openly gay man in New York, Haring was at the absolute epicenter of this devastation. He was watching his community be decimated.
He became a relentless public advocate for safe sex and AIDS education. He began heavily incorporating imagery that aligned with advocacy groups like ACTUP.
Specifically adopting their silence death motif, right?
Right, which reclaimed the pink triangle used in Nazi concentration camps. He was fighting tooth and nail to destigmatize the disease and force mainstream society to acknowledge the suffering of a marginalized community.
And here's where his visual vocabulary proves its absolute genius. He's drawing these incredibly vibrant, bouncy figures, the barking dogs, the radiant babies, the dancing people in bright primary colors, but they are delivering some of the heaviest, most terrifying realities of the 80s.
Because he understood the psychology of the viewer. Think about it. How do you get a deeply uncomfortable public to engage with the horrors of the crack epidemic or the AIDS crisis?
Right.
If you use overly graphic, depressing, or fear-mongering imagery, people will just look away. It's too painful.
It's basically the spoonful of sugar approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He used his approachable, energetic symbols as a hook. He disarmed you with joy and movement. You walk up to a mural because it looks playful, and once he has your undivided attention, he delivers a profound, inescapable social critique.
It's a brilliant bait and switch.
It really is.
But as we enter the final years of the decade, that fierce advocacy becomes agonizingly personal. In 1987, Haring was diagnosed with HIV. The following year, in the fall of 1988, he was diagnosed with AIDS.
And he already knew the grim reality of the disease.
Yeah, he had watched close friends die, including his former partner, Juan Dubose.
The diagnosis was a devastating blow.
Mm.
But his reaction to it is incredibly revealing. He told the LA Times, quote, "When AIDS became a reality in terms of my life, it started becoming a subject in my paintings. The more it affected my life, the more it affected my work."
So he didn't retreat into privacy?
Not at all.
He accelerated, he knew his time was extremely limited, and it kicked off this frantic, breathtaking race against the clock. His response to a terminal diagnosis was to try and physically outrun time by leaving as much of his art on the walls of the world as humanly possible.
And the sheer physical exertion of his final years is staggering. I mean, he is traveling the globe, painting massive, monumental public murals while his body is actively failing him.
It's hard to even imagine.
In February 1989, he's in the Barrio Chino neighborhood of Barcelona, painting Todos juntos podemos parar el SIDA. Together, we can stop AIDS.
And then in June of 1989, he goes to Pisa, Italy, and paints the Tutto Mondo mural on the exterior wall of a convent. It is a massive, incredibly complex piece celebrating global harmony. He spent days on scaffolding in the Italian summer heat, just painting furiously.
He was securing his artistic legacy, but he was also acutely aware of the administrative reality of his impending death.
Right, which is why he set up the foundation.
Exactly. In 1989, he established the Keith Haring Foundation. He knew he wasn't going to survive, and he needed a mechanism to ensure that his dual mission making art accessible to the masses and funding public health initiatives would outlive him.
So he set it up to manage his archive and continuously funnel money into AIDS organizations and children's programs.
Yes.
And right at the very end of his life, there is a piece of art that brings his entire journey full circle. Just weeks before his death, he finishes a work called The Life of Christ.
But it's not chalk on black paper.
No, and it's not spray paint on a brick wall either. It's a triptych carved in clay, cast in heavy bronze, and finished with white gold.
Which is such a profound departure from his usual mediums. After a career defined by the fleeting nature of street culture and pop art, his final major statement is this permanent, weighty, deeply complex return to the religious imagery of his youth in Pennsylvania.
It's a quiet, reflective period at the end of a very loud life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Keith Haring died of AIDS-related complications on February 16, 1990. He was just 31 years old.
A tragically short life, but a monumental footprint. He was trailblazer, honored on the National LGBTQ Wall of Honor at the Stonewall Inn. His foundation is still incredibly active today.
But there is a glaring, unavoidable paradox to his legacy, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. The man who opened a retail shop specifically to keep his art cheap and out of the hands of elitist collectors is now one of the most expensive artists on the planet.
Right.
In 2017, an untitled painting of his from 1982 sold at auction for $6.5 million.
It's the ultimate irony of the fine art machine. Capitalism always wins the auction. But I don't think that's his true legacy.
No, definitely not.
His legacy isn't the auction price. Keith Haring was a visionary who systematically dismantled the barriers between the high-end gallery and the dirty street corner. He proved that art doesn't have to be intimidating, obscure, or expensive to be vitally important.
He used his kinetic, explosive talent to force a conversation about the most vulnerable people in society.
He gave the world a visual vocabulary that bypassed language, class, and education. He spoke to everyone all at once.
Which is incredible.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the sources, we want to turn it back to you listening. Tomorrow morning, when you are walking to work or waiting for a train, look up from your phone, pay attention to the street art, the tags, the murals in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, take a real look.
Who is the artist holding the chalk or the spray can today? And what urgent message are they secretly trying to slip into your consciousness while you're just trying to get your morning coffee?
The walls of a city are never truly silent. There's always a dialogue happening if you know how to read the signs.
Absolutely. And we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Consider the concept of impermanent art. Keith Haring painted with incredibly fragile white chalk in subway stations. He painted on temporary construction fences. He painted on the skin of dancers.
Known it wouldn't last.
Exactly. He spent hours creating masterpieces, knowing with absolute certainty that they would be erased, stolen, torn down, or simply washed down the drain at the end of the night.
Wow.
We live in a modern era where we are obsessed with digital permanence, with backing up every photo, archiving every thought in the cloud so it lasts forever. But what is the unique, visceral power of creating something beautiful that you know is destined to disappear? Maybe the fleeting, temporary nature of that white chalk line in a noisy, gritty subway station is exactly what made it so brilliant in the first place?